Hi. Well, how many entrepreneurs in the room? Oh my God. Okay, this is for you. Actually, slightly different question. How many secretly fantasize about being an entrepreneur? In addition, that's right. Yes, even more. There you go. That's probably almost everybody. All right, so this is for you. Excuse the voice. Somebody stole it at Burning Man last weekend. It had absolutely nothing to do with singing in the Irish tent at 4 o'clock in the morning. So my personal passion is to embolden more young people, we'll define young broadly, to embark upon a more entrepreneurial path through life, and to help them develop and equip themselves with the requisite skills to do that, specifically resilience, and we'll come back to that. Just to kind of frame this a little bit, entrepreneurs, I marvel. I mean, I'm in awe of entrepreneurs. I was one a long time ago. It turns out I was a terrible one. So it taught me to be very respectful of people who, are actually proper entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs set out to reshape the universe, and they do things every day that have an 80% chance of failure. When they, maybe that sounds familiar, when they succeed, they create disruptive new products and services, they help create meaningful jobs, they help drive economic growth. What's not to love? There's this common misperception that it's all about the idea. In my experience, it's rarely about the idea. It's always about execution and getting stuff done. And conversely, if startups fail, they fail, it's kind of self-evident, they fail because the entrepreneurs give up and stop getting stuff done. So I approach this topic as an angel investor in an advisor with over 100 startups now. And actually, kind of more interesting and more importantly, I also look at this world through the lens that is my amazing 23-year-old daughter. Anybody who knows me knows that I have a gorgeous wife and 3 girls, and they are my secret weapon. So my 23-year-old, my oldest, is program director at something called Entrepreneur First in London. Has an incredibly interesting model. They go way, 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 way upstream, and they recruit top technical talent. So these are often 20-something-year-old PhDs in drones, robotics, machine learning, and you don't need an idea, you don't need a team. Entrepreneur First will take you for 6 months and help you form a team and help you form an idea. And I think it's one of the most interesting, disruptive, thoughtful, new areas and new ways of approaching the investment world that I've come across in a long time. I'm slightly biased because it's my gorgeous kid. So I'm a little bit involved in it through that, and see a lot of these young entrepreneurs through that perspective. It's just to put some shape around this. Let me talk for a second about what entrepreneurs do. So they take risks, as the name would suggest, even though George Bush said there wasn't a French word for it. Apparently, they take risks. So breaking that down, there are 3 things that they do. I think it's helpful to think about it in 3 ways. Come in. First of all, they identify and quantify a set of risks worth taking. And then they build a team to manage those risks. And then they try to generate a commensurate economic return. But that's probably a topic for another conference. I'll come back to the first 2. So first of all, identifying and quantifying risks worth taking. Breaking that down, there are 3 that we look at as early stage investors. One is market risk. So how big is the market? How fast is it growing? Is it in any way ripe for disruption? The second would be product risk. Do we see any evidence so far of what we would call product market fit? Do users use it? Do they pay for it? Whatever the evidence might be. And the third, and arguably the important, is execution risk. is the entrepreneur or the entrepreneurs, the team, however big or small it is at that stage, are they getting stuff done? So that's, where we would start that. And by the way, these are, just reflect on that for a second. These are people who, the rest of us, I suspect, if you're like me, spend most of our time, most of our lives trying to minimize, mitigate risk, reduce it altogether if we can. And these people are going out there seeking and inviting risk into their lives, not just the kind of professional risk that I'm going to talk about, but also the personal risk. Because the reality here is this is an entrepreneurial endeavor is a risk to health, to relationships, to your mortgage, to a whole bunch of stuff. Actually, there's a brilliant piece of work by Barbara Sahakian, a professor at the Department of Psychiatry at University of Cambridge in the UK, and she talks about measuring the statistically significant difference in the way that entrepreneurs approach what she calls hot decision-making, which is decisions that have a high emotional impact. So in cold decision-making, they're kind of like the rest of us, but when it's a hot decision, when it has an emotional impact, they are statistically significantly better at making those decisions than the rest of us are. It's kind of interesting to sort of think about that. The second part of what entrepreneurs do, once they've identified a set of risks worth taking, is they build a team to manage those risks and to create what we might call in MBA language, sustainable competitive differentiation. So as soon as I have figured out that there are some risks worth taking over here, you better believe there are 100 other people who've figured the same thing and they're building something pretty similar. Not always, but mostly. And so in that journey, in the building a team to manage the risk that we've identified, the key, if I had to reduce everything I've learned from working with thousands of entrepreneurs over the last X years, I'm incredibly old, and it would be resilience. So the characteristic is resilience. And what I mean by resilience, because it's a relatively fluffy word, but what I mean by resilience would encompass, it would be about managing stress and anxiety. I think we're going to talk about that a lot over the next 24 hours or so. It would be about making decisions in highly uncertain, highly volatile circumstances. It would be about emotional intelligence. It would be about all of those things. A friend of mine, Gillian Stamp, who has 2 PhDs, talks about I think it's a beautiful concept of flow. And I'm in flow, I am resilient when my capabilities and my creativity are a good match for the scale and complexity of the challenge, the entrepreneurial challenge that I've set out upon. And that will tend to be when I'm finding my work meaningful. And I really like that kind of notion of flow. I think Nassim Nicholas Taleb added immeasurably to this whole set of thinking when he wrote his book. Actually, I won't tell you what it's called because I'm going to ask you a question, and the answer is the name of the book. So I much prefer these things. I hope you do too, if it's a bit more conversational, and ask me any question you like. He says, what is the opposite of fragile? Any answers? Any? Come on, just because you've read the book. Okay, no, that's right. What I was hoping for is somebody would say resilient, robust, solid, all of those things. And he makes thank you, he makes the great point that, yeah, those are things that kind of can withstand risk, volatility, uncertainty. And what I'm looking for is something that positively blooms and blossoms with the more volatility, the more uncertainty, the more risk in the environment, the more this thing grows. And he said, the word doesn't exist, so I'll make one up, and it's called anti-fragile. And I think that's an incredibly powerful notion. He talks a lot about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinking. And entrepreneurs use risk, uncertainty, volatility as information. And again, this is this process of deliberately, intentionally inviting in more risk into our lives, which personally I find very kind of foreign concept, but I know it when I see it, when people are doing it. I think that's an incredibly helpful addition to the conversation. And in a way, if a lot of what I was talking about with resilience, managing stress and anxiety, and if that's kind of protecting the downside of being an entrepreneur, then I think the anti-fragile, kind of embracing this, is really unlocking the upside of being an entrepreneur. And I think both are, very, very, very important. Another interesting question is sort of, okay, so resilience is important in entrepreneurs. How do we know it when we see it? How do we measure it? And it's quite a hard thing to measure, but there are people doing some pretty interesting work there. So Richie Davidson is doing quite a lot of work on how quickly does our neurocircuitry recover from adversity. And I think ultimately that's going to be one of the key determinants of, at the neuroscience level, what is it that, how do we actually measure resilience? And the answer will be this, the rapidity with which our brain recovers. There are a couple, one called the Connor-Davidson model, and another one, imaginatively, called the Resilience Scale for Adults, and there's one for kids, which measure resilience across 5 or more dimensions. Really, and I think those are beginning to feel quite robust. I've seen them applied to quite large data sets. So you can begin to kind of get metrics for resilience. So you can, help people place themselves on a scale and put some metric and shape around it. And then I think, the last thing is really, how do you help entrepreneurs or anybody build resilience? It's because, and we know, I guess, the next 24 hours are all about neuroplasticity, and resilience is, I strongly, firmly believe, something that can be developed, can be built. And I saw some really interesting work by somebody called Podesky. I apologize, I can't remember the first name. It's really good. It's called strength-based CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is, the therapist will sit with a client, identify a bunch of strengths that client has, and then apply that to a personal model which is optimized for resilience in certain situations, in my instance, in entrepreneurial situations. So it's a CBT approach to building resilience. Another one is, I'm on the board of, at Oxford University, of the Department of Psychiatry has something called the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. Clues in the name, you can probably see where I'm going with this one, especially this crowd. And we have spent, especially Mark Williams, who started that, and the team there have spent quite a lot of time with Entrepreneur First, with my daughter's organization and many others, working with entrepreneurs, using mindfulness or MBCT as a tool for entrepreneurs to help them build resilience. And it's really, really, really interesting. The take-up is very, very strong. And I think part of that is that Mark and the OMC team are brilliant, and there's a rigor to the MBCT approach which resonates with entrepreneurs. And I think, honestly, another part of it is that when mindfulness comes in a neuroscience wrapper, that rather than a hippie yoga wrapper, rightly or wrongly, that the neuroscience wrapper helps it resonate more with the kind of type A driven entrepreneurs that I'm dealing with all day, every day. And that it's very, very, very early. We've just done some early experiments, but that seems to be really bearing fruit. And what's exciting about that is entrepreneurs, almost by definition, if the founders of a business find that mindfulness can help in whatever form, building resilience, then it tends to be something that's kind of built into the DNA of an organization, and it's kind of spreads automatically because it works. It's free. And we're seeing really interesting results with that. Last one I'd mention is another friend of mine, Ruby Wax, incredibly interesting character who had a tough time about 4 or 5 years ago, and to figure out what went wrong with her brain, she went to Oxford, and she went to Mark Williams, the Department of Psychiatry at Oxford University, and did a master's in neuroscience to figure out what on earth had gone wrong with her brain. She's an incredibly talented TV presenter and comedian. She has then channeled that into a show and a set of thoughts and 2 books now about, and she works with me on a lot of this entrepreneurial stuff. And she's coming out in a really interesting place, saying that there is a real opportunity to bring technology into mental well-being, and specific resilience for entrepreneurs, but much more broadly into the mental well-being space, in the same way that Fitbit and other companies have brought technology into the physical well-being space. And specifically, she's done a lot of thinking and talking to the big technology companies around the world, which I probably shouldn't mention. And apparently the next frontier is the ear. And so we all saw how well Google Glass worked. And it turns out that the eye is not ideal for that, because we need, for our eyes, we tend to prefer not multiple video streams, but a single video stream. Otherwise, we smack into trees and things as we're looking at things in a corner of our peripheral vision. But with audio, we are really good at parallel. I guarantee everybody is doing this right now. Maybe you're listening to me, probably not. Maybe you're listening to some other sounds here. We're very used to parallel processing lots of audio streams. We can do that very easily. So that's the first advantage. The second advantage that the ear has is that the membrane here, and it's incredibly close to the brain, and the membrane is very, very thin. And so it's actually incredibly good for picking up things like heart rate variability, which is a very good proxy for the amount of cortisol zooming around. So we're going to have a generation of technology very soon, kind of now, but soon at a commercial level, that will be very, very good at helping us kind of identify, am I in resilient mode right now? And I might just keep that information to myself. I might want to share it with the rest of you, or my boss, or my wife, or my daughters, or I might not. But that's the etiquette that we'll figure out over the next few years. But technology to enable me to realize I'm not in the zone right now to make that really important decision that will affect the 30 people working with me in my company. I'll make it in 20 minutes, or I'll make it in 3 weeks' time. So the application of technology, I've got 1 minute, 34 seconds left. The applications of technology to this whole area as well. That's it. I am very happy if we have time to answer questions now, or I'm going to be around all afternoon if anybody has questions for later. Sorry. I said it was a good proxy for the amount of cortisol in the zooming around the system. So stress, it's a good proxy for the amount of stress. What question do you have?
Hi, would you look at resilience as for entrepreneurs, the ability to adapt to change or adversity, or how would you define it?
I think that's a really good definition of it, and I think that's the Richie Davidson sort of definition of it. I just can't help thinking that that's at the essence of it. So when I say it's about managing stress and anxiety, I think that's a very similar thing. When I say it also has an element of emotional intelligence as well. So it's not just my resilience, but it's kind of an organizational resilience. So it's a team resilience thing, and I should have good radar for that. I should be sort of tuned to the team as well. So it's not just a personal thing. I think it's a group thing as well. All right. Thank you very much.